The trading post was louder than usual. Wagons unloading, cattle lowing in the pens, a preacher shouting prices for hymn books no one would buy. Rancher Dax Holwell didn't come here often, but his saddle cinch had split clean that morning, and Amos Pritt's post was the only place within half a day's ride that had leather worth stitching. He tied his horse, stepped into the shade of the overhang, and froze. A girl, maybe 7, maybe 9, it was hard to tell beneath the dirt and hunger, stood barefoot near the porch rail. Her hair was chopped uneven, her dress stiff with grime. But it was her voice that stopped him. High, fragile, too steady for a beggar. "Can I hug you just once, sir?" she asked. She didn't smile. She just looked at him with eyes too tired for her size. Around them, the crowd went quiet for a beat, then resumed bartering, as if she were invisible. Dax studied her. Her arms were thin, her lips split, but when she stepped forward, he instinctively knelt to meet her, and that's when he felt it. Cold metal, around her neck, beneath the fraying collar of her dress, something hard clinked against his chest. He drew back and gently lifted the edge of the fabric. A collar, iron, bolted, and from beneath the porch slats, a rusted chain trailed back and hooked onto a low beam with a padlock. His stomach turned. She didn't flinch, just whispered, "Don't tell Amos. He says I ain't supposed to talk to buyers." Buyers? Dax stood slowly, chest tight. "Who put that on you?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then she shook her head once, tiny, like a bird too tired to fly. From inside the post, Amos Pritt's voice rang out. "You touching my property, Holwell?" Dax turned slowly as the man waddled into view, wiping his hands on a blood-stained apron. "She ain't for sale. She's mine. Found her wandering like a wild thing last winter. Been feeding her, training her. She works, she eats." Dax didn't speak. He just looked down again, at the girl, still standing there, not running, not crying, only waiting, as if her whole life had been lived on that porch, that chain, that hope. And as the wind kicked up dust between them, Dax knew one thing with perfect clarity. This was not a purchase. This was a reckoning. Dax didn't speak. Not yet. He stepped back from the girl, fists clenched at his sides, his boots rooted firm against the porch boards as if movement might crack the ground beneath him. Amos Pritt chuckled, low and smug. "Thought you was here for leather, Holwell, unless you're looking to buy trouble instead?" Dax looked at him, really looked, the apron stained with more than meat, the sweat-soaked collar, the eyes of a man too used to being obeyed in shadows. "How much?" Dax said quietly, voice like gravel. Amos raised a brow. "Told you, ain't for sale." "Then why's she on a chain?" Amos's face soured. "Because she's wild. Bit me first week I had her. Won't eat less she's told. I'm civilizing her." The girl stared at the ground now. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. Dax forced himself not to reach for the rifle slung over his shoulder. "You can't chain a child, Amos." "Ain't no law out here says I can't," Amos spat. "She ain't blood, ain't registered, just showed up out of nowhere like a stray. You got dogs. You know what happens if you don't collar 'em." The crowd was listening now, but no one stepped in. Not the preacher, not the storekeep, not the traveling peddlers who knew the price of crossing Amos Pritt in a town with no sheriff. Dax looked down at the girl. Her collar was tight enough to leave a mark above the bone. He knelt again, slower this time. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then barely whispered, "Junie." He nodded once. "Junie, do you want to leave with me?" Her eyes twitched upward. Hope flickered like something forbidden. She opened her mouth, then stopped. She turned her head slightly and looked toward the post, where a length of dried jerky hung from a nail. Her voice came out small. He said if I leave, I don't eat again. Dax stood, heart thudding. Then I'll feed you. Amos stepped forward. I said she ain't. But Dax had already reached into his coat and pulled out something small, folded in leather, the deed to his south pasture. He dropped it in the dirt. This is what a life is worth now? He said coldly. Fine, take it. Amos blinked. You serious? Dead. Dax knelt, unlatched the chain himself. Junie flinched, but when he took her hand, she didn't pull away, and for the first time, the porch felt like freedom. The ride home was long, but Junie didn't speak once. She clutched the saddle horn like it might vanish if she let go, her eyes fixed on the horizon but unfocused, as if she wasn't sure the world beyond the trading post really existed. Dax rode slow, letting the wind and the rhythm of hooves do what words couldn't. He didn't ask questions, didn't press. Only once did he glance back and say, You can sleep if you need to. She nodded but didn't close her eyes. She was still wearing the collar. He hadn't been able to cut it off yet. Amos hadn't given him a key, and the iron was too thick to break without tools. It weighed heavy on her neck, glinting dully in the sun, a reminder with every bump of the trail. When they reached the ranch, Dax dismounted and helped her down. She didn't resist, but she didn't step forward either. Just stood there beside his horse, uncertain. The other hands glanced up from their chores but said nothing. They knew better than to question Holwell's silence when his jaw was tight and his brow low. He led Junie inside, poured her water, and placed a fresh biscuit on the table. She didn't move toward it. You can eat, he said gently. It's yours. She stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on the plate like it might vanish. She picked up the biscuit, held it with both hands, then looked at him. Do I have to work for it? Dax's throat tightened. No, he said. You just have to be a child. She blinked. That word meant less to her than he wanted it to. He opened a drawer, pulled out an old hacksaw, and sat her on the stool by the fire. This might hurt a little, he said, kneeling beside her. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink when the metal began to grind. It took time. Sweat beaded at his temple as he worked, careful not to scrape her skin. When the collar finally cracked, it fell with a soft clink to the wooden floor. Junie stared at it, then at him. Her hand rose slowly to her neck, as if confirming its absence. Now you can breathe right, Dax said. She nodded once. Then, barely above a whisper, came the words, Can I hug you again, sir? And when he bent down, her arms wrapped around him, not out of fear, but release. Dax showed her to the small guest room at the back of the ranch house, the one his sister had sewn up before leaving for Montana, the one no one had used in 3 years. The quilt on the bed was faded blue, stitched with crooked stars and yellowed thread, but it smelled like lavender and dust, not fear. Junie stood in the doorway, one bare foot curled over the other, hands clasped behind her back. This all mine? She asked, her voice thin, unsure. Dax nodded. It's yours now. No lock, no chain. You come and go when you like. She stepped in slow, eyes darting like a colt in a new pen. She ran her fingers over the edge of the quilt, then glanced toward the window. Is it okay to open that? It's your room, he said. You don't have to ask. She nodded again, still not quite believing. He watched as she turned the latch and pushed open the shutters. Sunlight spilled across the floor in warm stripes. For a moment, she just stood there, bathing in it like someone who'd forgotten what light felt like. There's soap and towels on the shelf, he added. You want a bath? I'll heat the water. She didn't answer, but her fingers touched the dirt caked along her arms, and he saw the shame flash behind her eyes. No rush, he said gently. You rest first. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. What if he comes back? Dax turned slowly. Her eyes were sharp now. No tears, no panic. Just the flat voice of someone used to trouble. Amos, she clarified. He won't, Dax said. I paid him what he thinks he's owed, and if he does ride out here... He nodded toward the rifle mounted above the hearth. He won't come twice. Junie seemed to weigh that. Then she walked to the bed and sat, knees together, hands in her lap. You gonna change your mind later? About what? Me being here. Dax shook his head. Not unless you start stealing my horse and setting fire to the barn. Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Not quite, but something living. Guess I'll try not to. He gave her one last nod, then closed the door gently behind him. She stared at it for a long time. It didn't lock. And for the first time in her memory, that made her feel safe. Dax rose before dawn like always, expecting the ranch quiet, coffee hot, and the sky still black over the hills. But as he stepped out to feed the horses, he nearly tripped over a small figure crouched by the barn door. Junie. Barefoot, dress wrinkled, hair damp from morning dew, she was sweeping, with a broken rake. You don't need to do that, he said, voice low but firm. She didn't look up. I thought maybe I could stay longer if I helped. You don't have to earn a bed here, Junie. She paused, then muttered, I always had to before. Dax ran a hand down his jaw. The rake shook in her grip, not from cold, but from habit, from fear that still lived in her muscles. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you some breakfast. She hesitated, then followed him back inside, steps small and careful like she expected to be told no at any second. He poured her a cup of warm milk, added honey, and slid a plate of cornbread across the table. She stared at it. Is this for now or for later? It's for you, he said, whenever you're hungry. She took the smallest bite possible, like rationing was still stitched into her bones. Dax sat across from her, arms folded. You ever go to school? He asked. She shook her head. Amos said learning was for people who didn't already owe him. You want to learn? Junie paused, licking crumbs from her fingers. Can I? You can do whatever you want now. She looked up at him for the first time that morning. Even nothing? He smiled faintly. Especially nothing. That got a real response, a twitch of her lips, quick and unsure. After breakfast, he handed her a proper broom and said, If you want to help, start inside. That quilt could use some shaking. She took the broom like it was a sword she didn't yet believe she had a right to carry. But she nodded, and for the first time, didn't ask permission to move. As Dax stepped outside to feed the horses, he looked back through the window. Junie stood in the center of the room, broom in one hand, her other brushing gently over the edge of the blue quilt. She wasn't cleaning, just feeling. Like the softness itself was proof she hadn't imagined the night before. Like she was learning how to rest. It was just after midday when the knock came. Not loud, not frantic, just 3 sharp raps on the ranch house door. Dax wiped his hands on a rag and opened it slow. A man stood there with a wide hat pulled low, leather vest faded from years on the trail, and eyes that didn't match the smile he wore. Holwell, right? The man asked. Name's Marin. I handle trades for Amos Pritt. Dax didn't move. Thought we were settled. Marin nodded, glancing past Dax into the house. That's the thing. Amos says you took more than the girl. What else would I've taken? He says the collar. Dax's jaw clenched. I cut it off. It's trash. He wants it back. Says it's custom iron. Cost him good silver. From behind him, he felt movement, Junie, standing in the hallway, frozen halfway down the stairs. She'd heard everything. Her eyes weren't wide, just distant, like the sound of the word collar had pulled her underwater. "He send you out here to scare her?" Dax asked coldly. Marin shrugged. "Not my business. I just deliver messages." Dax stepped outside and shut the door behind him. "Here's mine," he said, voice low. "You tell Amos if he wants iron so bad, I'll gladly give him a horseshoe, or a boot to the teeth." Marin's smile faded. "You talk brave for a man standing alone." "I'm not alone," Dax replied. "And I'm not scared of ghosts." Marin's hand twitched near his belt, but Dax didn't flinch, just stared. Silent, steady, the kind of silence that made men doubt their footing. Marin backed up a step. "Fine, I'll tell him, but this ain't the end." "It is for her," Dax said. "She's done being property." When the man rode off, Dax waited until the dust settled, then went back inside. Junie hadn't moved. He knelt beside her. "You okay?" She nodded too fast. "He's not coming back," Dax said, "and even if he tries, he won't get far." "He wanted the collar," she said. "Not me." Dax met her eyes. "He never really wanted you. He wanted control. That's different." She looked down, small hands twisting in her skirt. "You still got it?" "The collar?" He nodded. "Buried it out by the old well, deep, like it never mattered." She whispered, "Thank you." And then, for the first time, she reached for his hand. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. 3 days passed without another rider, another knock, or another shadow crawling in from Amos Pritt's direction. The ranch settled back into its rhythm. Early mornings, fence mending, quiet suppers. But Junie moved differently now. Not like someone hiding, but like someone tiptoeing toward possibility. One morning, Dax found her out by the barn scribbling letters in the dirt with a stick. She didn't notice him at first. Tongue between her teeth, brows furrowed with concentration. "You learnin' to write?" he asked gently. She startled, then covered the dirt with her foot. "Kinda," she said. "Been watching your books." He smiled. "Don't have to sneak. I can show you how for real. Don't want to mess 'em up." "Messing up's part of it." She hesitated, then whispered, "Junie wasn't my name." Dax sat on the edge of the trough. "No." "He gave it to me," she said. "Said it sounded harmless." Her voice dropped. "Didn't even know my real name anymore. Just remember it started with an M." Dax let that sit for a moment, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a stub of charcoal. "Well," he said, handing it to her, "let's start again." She knelt and wrote an M, then an A. Stopped, looked up. "Maybe Mara," she said. "I think I like that." Dax nodded. "Then Mara it is." She smiled, small but real, and underlined the name twice in the dust. Later that day, she asked for a pair of scissors. "What for?" he asked. "Want my hair shorter? The collar always got caught in it. Feels like it's still there." He hesitated, then handed them over. She chopped it unevenly, and Dax didn't correct her. He didn't have to. It wasn't about how it looked. It was about what it meant. That night, at supper, he served her first. She blinked, surprised. "You're the one with a new name," he said. "That deserves something." She grinned just a little and took her spoon without a word. When the sun set, she curled up on the porch beside Poke, the ranch dog, and laid her head on his side. Dax watched from inside, the lamplight casting long shadows. She didn't flinch when the wind picked up. Didn't check the door for locks. She just whispered her new name into the dog's fur, like a secret she was finally ready to believe. The old well sat at the edge of the north pasture, half sunk and dry since before Dax bought the land. No one went near it, not the hands, not the horses. But Mara walked there with purpose, the morning sun rising behind her like a promise. Dax saw her from the barn and followed, keeping a quiet distance. She knelt by the stones and began digging with her hands, fingers scraping through packed earth and brittle roots. When he reached her, she didn't look up. "It's still here, isn't it?" she asked. "I buried it deep," he said gently. "Didn't think you'd want to see it again." "I don't," she whispered, "but I need to." He crouched beside her, and together they cleared the dirt until the iron collar lay exposed. Cold, rusted, still closed. Mara stared at it, breathing hard. "I kept dreaming it was back on me," she said, "like I'd wake up and it'd be there, tight, pulling me backwards." Dax said nothing. He knew better than to fill silence meant for memory. She picked it up slowly. It was heavier than she remembered. Or maybe she was just stronger now. "Amos said this was what made me his," she said. "Said if I ever lost it, I'd lose everything." "He lied," Dax said. "You're not made of chains." Mara looked at him, eyes sharp. "Then let's prove it." She stood, collar in hand, and walked to the fire pit near the edge of the corral. She placed it on the stones and turned to Dax. "Can I borrow your axe?" He brought it without a word. She raised it once, paused, then brought it down hard. The clang rang out across the pasture. Once. Twice. On the third strike, the collar split open and rolled into the ash. Mara stared at the broken halves for a long moment, then sat down, chest heaving. "It's not about hating him," she said. "It's about not letting him live here." She tapped her chest. "Not anymore." Dax nodded. "Then you're free, truly." She smiled, not just with her mouth, but with her shoulders, her spine, her whole being. That night the fire crackled warm, and Mara asked if she could sleep outside. Not because she was afraid, because she wanted to. Under stars, on her own terms, with the dog at her feet, and no chain to drag her dreams backwards. It was nearly dusk when Mara asked for pen and paper. Dax raised an eyebrow but didn't question it, just fetched his best ink and left her alone in the study. For over an hour, she sat by the window, staring at the page like it owed her something. Then, with slow, deliberate strokes, she began to write. Not neat, not quick, but steady. When Dax passed by later with an oil lamp, he caught a glimpse of her handwriting. At the top, it read, "To the woman I hope still remembers me." She didn't stop writing, didn't look up. Only when the light outside fully vanished did she set down the pen and exhale like she'd climbed a mountain. Dax waited until she emerged. "That for someone important?" he asked. She nodded. "My mother?" He stayed quiet, letting the weight of it settle. "I think she's alive," Mara said. "Amos always said she was dead, but I remember, once when I was little, a woman came crying to the porch. He sent her away. I think it was her." Dax stepped aside as she walked out into the night, envelope clutched in both hands. "I don't even know if it'll reach her," she whispered. "But I had to say it, that I'm okay, that I remember the lullaby, that I still hum it when I'm scared." She looked up at him. "That I have a name again, that someone gave it back to me." Dax cleared his throat. "I'll ride it to town tomorrow. Make sure it's posted." She nodded, but didn't move. "Can I bury something else?" she asked. He tilted his head. "Another collar?" "No," she said softly. "This one's made of shame." She led him behind the barn, where she had dug a shallow pit. Inside was her old dress, the one Amos made her wear, thin, torn, meant to humiliate. She placed the letter on top of it gently, then lit a match. As the fabric curled and blackened, she didn't cry. She just watched, steady. When only ash remained, she whispered, "Goodbye, Junie." And Dax, standing beside her, whispered it too. Not for the girl she used to be, but for the sorrow that finally had no more room to stay. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, she slept without a single flinch. Spring brought color back to the ranch in slow, stubborn bursts. Wildflowers in the ditch, warm rains soaking the dust, and the smell of green things growing. But nothing bloomed more clearly than the girl now known as Mara. She no longer flinched at creaking floorboards or shrank from shadows across doorways. She whistled to the hens. She tied red ribbons on the colt's mane. She laughed, real and loud, when Poke the dog rolled in the mud and then begged for forgiveness with wet eyes. That morning, Dax found her fixing a broken slat in the fence with a hammer too big for her hand. "Need help?" he asked. She shook her head. "I want to do this one myself." He leaned on the post and watched her, quietly proud. "You ever think of leaving? Of starting somewhere else?" She paused, considering it. "Sometimes. But not today. Today, this place feels like mine." He smiled. "It is." At midday, a rider approached from the trail. Mara stiffened for a second. But only for a second. It wasn't Amos. It was a mail courier, and he handed Dax a folded reply from a nearby town. Mara took it with trembling fingers. Inside was a note in a careful, unfamiliar script. "I think of you every night. I never stopped humming that lullaby. It was signed Mother." Mara pressed the paper to her chest and didn't say a word for a long time. Then she walked to the porch and sat down, sunlight catching the smoothness of her shorn hair. "I thought I'd feel angry," she said. "But I don't. I just feel possible." Dax nodded. "That's more than most folks get." "I think I want to stay a while," she said. "Help with the calves. Maybe mend those curtains you hate." He chuckled. "Deal." As the sun dropped behind the hills, Dax brought her a slice of pie and sat beside her. She leaned her head on his shoulder, not like a lost girl clinging to safety, but like someone choosing where to rest. When the first stars appeared, she whispered, "I used to think I was someone's nothing. Now I think I'm just me." Dax looked down at her, and for the first time in years, he felt peace, not as silence, but as something earned. In the distance, a coyote called. The wind stirred the prairie grass, and on the porch of a quiet ranch, a girl who used to be nobody finally belonged to herself. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more soul-deep stories here on Echoes of the West. If you had seen her collar lying in the dirt, would you have walked past or broken it too? Tell us below.